Come on in, guys. Come on in. There's room on this side.
I'll come in.
Be visible.
Be visible. Yeah.
You are majority of us, lady.
Just move forward. Let Lee stand behind you. She's taller. Why excited about All right, are we ready? I need a gavel or something.
That's what happens when you get the House and Senate together.
Are we ready?
We're ready.
All right, let's go. Can you see how much we care about protecting our democracy? Here we are on January 6th, on the 2-year anniversary of the insurrection, and I think that the number of people you see here speaks to how important this issue is to us as policymakers as well as personally. Really, lawmakers were really under threat that day. We saw that very compelling footage of Nancy Pelosi on that day in communication with the governor of Virginia and the governor of Maryland. So I'm really proud to be here and really proud of what we're doing on this January 6th. We know in this election that voters said loud and clear they were tired of extremism. They rejected the insurrectionists' denial of the 2020 election results. They rejected violent political rhetoric. And they rejected those running for office who would seek to undermine our democracy. We saw election deniers lose races around the country, and we saw secretaries of state, including our very own, be the top vote getter in a number of different states. So we all believe that our democracy works best when all voices are heard, and you will see us moving legislation this session to ensure that more voices are heard at the ballot box and that young people have easy access to the ballot box and that those people who have paid their debt to society get a chance to be part of the voting population again. So I'm very grateful to the co-chairs of the Inclusive Democracy Caucus, and you'll hear more from them in just a moment, and all the people working on House File and Senate File 3. We're synced up in the numbers there, and it is House File 3 and Senate File 3 because of the level of importance it has in both of our chambers. That bill is called the Democracy for the People Act, but you are going to hear in just a couple minutes of all the great things that are in that one bill, many of which we're going to move as quickly as we can. And with that, I think, do I turn it over to Majority Leader Dietzick? I got to get used to that. I love the sound of that.
Good morning, everyone. As the speaker said, my name is Carrie Dietzick, and I'm pleased to be here with the speaker and with all of these leaders behind me, who on the second anniversary of the January 6th attack on our democracy, they have chosen to stand up to defend democracy. Some of the forces that attempted to overturn a free and fair election at the U.S. Capitol 2 years ago are still with us today. This entire week, Americans have watched as the U.S. House of Representatives has been chaotically unable to choose a speaker. That is stopping the work of the people, and that is not acceptable. We just came off a hard-fought election. The Senate DFL knocked on over 500,000 doors. We listened to Minnesotans tell us they were concerned that our democracy remains under attack, both at the state level and at the country level. Minnesotans sent us here to protect and expand democracy. It's one of the reasons the House and the Senate DFL are united in making defending democracy a top priority this session. The formation of the Inclusive Democracy Caucus, made up of legislators who will lead these efforts, is a strong signal to Minnesotans that DFLers have heard their concerns, and we will not be silent while democracy is under attack. We want to ensure elections are fair and accessible for every Minnesota voter, and we want to give our election officials the tools they need to keep it that way. We are united behind this work. We are excited and ready to get that work done. So once again, I want to thank all the leaders behind me, you can see this great group, for standing up here today and for their efforts. And I want to reassure Minnesotans that defending democracy is a top DFL priority. And next, I'm going to turn it over to Representative Greenman.
Good morning. I am really grateful to our amazing caucus leaders and to these pro-democracy legislators who are here today, and to my co-chairs of this Inclusive Democracy Caucus, Senator Liz Bolden, who you'll hear from in a minute, and Representative Cedric Frazier, who is out with illness but is my co-chair. We are here today because we believe in the power of Minnesotans to come together, to govern, to solve problems together, to make decisions together, and to build a collective, inclusive future, a multiracial democracy. That is the heart of government of, by, and for the people. And it is important that we did it today on January 6th, on the second anniversary. In addition to founding the Inclusive Democracy Caucus together, my colleague Senator Bolden and Representative Frazier and I, we were sworn in. We started our legislative careers in the shadows of January 6th. We were sworn in on a Tuesday, and on a Wednesday, January 6th, we all watched with all of you and the country in shock as the sitting president encouraged a violent insurrection to halt the peaceful transfer of power and reverse the outcome of an election. And we've seen in the last 2 years that the attacks on our democracy did not start, and they have not stopped since January 6th. As a national voting rights lawyer, I should introduce myself. I'm Representative Emma Greenman. And if you've heard me talk, you've heard about my experience as a national voting rights lawyer. I've spent a decade on the front lines of protecting our democracy, protecting attacks on multiracial democracy, Arizona, Georgia, Florida, Pennsylvania, and right here in Minnesota. And since January 6th, the attacks have not stopped. The disinformation and lies about election systems have only grown. Political violence is increasing. Election workers are facing growing threats, and as our majority leader mentioned, we're watching the extremism dominate a political party both in Washington and here in Minnesota. This didn't happen overnight, and there are no quick fixes to repairing the damage done. But the fact is that the first election since January 6th, when both parties put democracy firmly on the ballot, 2.5 million Minnesotans from every race, region, political persuasion, and generation turned out not just to participate in our democracy, but to protect it. And if 2020 taught us anything, it's that the threats to our democracy are not defeated in one election. Inclusive democracy takes more than just protecting attacks. Our democracy has not been perfect, far from it. Historical exclusions and current structural barriers cause disparities in participation and representation in BIPOC communities, young folks, new Americans, people with disabilities, and other communities at the margins. This has undermined the promise of full inclusive democracy. But the promise of American democracy is that we together have the power to improve it, to strengthen it, to build that multiracial, multi-generational, gender-inclusive democracy. That we can realize the vision, we as lawmakers of diverse backgrounds, by working together to expand the freedom to vote and to ensure that folks can come together to solve problems. We as communities, working together across race, across region, across generation, can come together to make decisions, to govern, to solve problems, to dream big together. That we as Minnesotans, by working together to build a robust, participatory democracy, can ensure that everyone has a voice and that we all have a stake in our future. We are here doing this work because we believe in that vision of multiracial, inclusive democracy. We're here because we are committed to doing that work. We're committed to doing it together, and that's what this Inclusive Democracy Caucus is all about. So with that, I will turn it over to my colleague, Representative Agbaje.
Thank you, everyone. My name is Esther Agbaje. I represent House District 59B, which is an area that covers downtown Minneapolis and parts of North Minneapolis. Today, we're here to respond to the mandate from the people of Minnesota that want and deserve an inclusive democracy where everyone's voice is heard. This caucus will be a space where we work together to increase voter turnout by educating voters about what's on the ballot, making sure they have the correct, verifiable information about what they're voting for. We also want to make it simpler to vote. You'll hear more about that legislation in ways that we are increasing access to the ballot box. And finally, we want to ensure that every Minnesotan has access to their polling place, whether that is through accessibility, if you are a person who has disabilities, or that you are free from intimidation when you go to vote. In my other role here, I'm also a co-chair of the Posse Caucus, and we're very interested in supporting the continued efforts to expand the franchise to people who are formerly incarcerated. They are members of our community, and they deserve to fully participate in our society. There's been too many times in our history where the right to vote has been systematically exclusive of people who are allowed to participate when they're able to participate. And the legislation that we'll be talking about here today makes sure that many more people have access to vote. Expanding the right to vote makes our democracy vibrant and stronger. And I am proud to be part of one of the organizing members of this caucus to make sure that we get that done for Minnesotans this year. Thank you. I'll turn it over to Senator Port.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Senator Lindsay Port. I represent District 55, Burnsville and Savage. Minnesotans told us loud and clear that protecting and expanding democracy is critical, and that they agree that the threat of extremism is real and active. I'm thrilled to be a part of forming the Inclusive Democracy Caucus, in part to push forward our Democracy for the People Act, which, as the speaker said and the majority leader said, is House File and Senate File 3. Both of our caucuses have put this legislation front and center as a top priority because it includes all aspects of our work. For example, expanding access to vote through automatic voter registration, through pre-registration for 16 and 17-year-olds, and by restoring the vote to those who have served their time. It strengthens and addresses the needs of elected officials in our counties and cities that are responsible for ensuring that our elections happen. And it addresses disclosure of dark money and campaign finance reform, which is very, very sorely overdue in our state. We have an opportunity at this moment to center the voices of the people, and that is the reason behind forming this caucus. Our democracy works best when the people's voices are centered in it, and that is our job as a caucus, as representatives from all across the state, to ensure that the people of Minnesota are the ones whose voices are centered in our democracy.
Good morning. I'm Senator Liz Bolden. I represent District 25, which is the Rochester area. I will say that this has not been my life's work. I am not a voting rights lawyer like my dear friend and colleague, Representative Emma Greenman. I'm a nurse. But I'm proud to be the Senate chair of this caucus, and I'm committed to protecting and expanding our democracy because of the moment we find ourselves in. 2 years ago today, the day after I was sworn into public office, we witnessed a violent, deadly insurrection at our nation's capital. And the danger to our democracy did not end on that January 6th. We are continue to experience a coordinated campaign of disinformation to delegitimize our democratic process and push us towards chaos and authoritarianism. We have members in our Minnesota legislature who are election deniers and have publicly supported insurrectionists. We have a body of Congress that cannot organize itself, delaying the work of the people. Our democracy continues to be in danger. I am here, we are all here, along with others who were not able to be here this morning, because we understand the gravity of this moment, and we are stepping up to do the work to build a multiracial democracy where every eligible Minnesotan can easily cast their vote and make their voice heard. We are all here because whether we want to make progress on education or housing or healthcare or environment, public safety or any other issue, all of that work depends on a working democracy. So thank you for being here, and we are happy to take questions.
Can you offer some additional details about the caucus? How many members are there? What's the party breakup, that kind of thing?
So today we are launching it, so you'll see the folks behind us and our three co-chairs. We are still adding it, so I can get you a list, but I suspect that it'll be a little bit longer. There's, I think, about 35 now, and we started with our pro-democracy legislators, and so that's, the hope is that everybody who shares our mission. I think a little bit about that will be, we'll share a little bit more of that, and you heard about that, right? An inclusive multiracial democracy that that supports legislation that strengthens voter access, that ensures that voters, not corporations or special interests, are the ones who are calling the shots. So anybody who shares that mission and shares our values around that legislation, we will encourage to be involved and actually get to work, because this is going to be a working caucus.
Are all the pieces of legislation listed here, you know, the pre-registering and automatic registration and also this absentee, are these all part of this one package? And do you expect that to move through the process and pass potentially this year?
Yeah, I think the legislation that Senator Port and I are co-sponsoring, that the majority leader and that the speaker mentioned, that is all included in there. What I will say is, and we have the chairs of both of our elections committee, Chair Carlson and Chair Freiberg. I think that what they would tell you is there's a lot of energy to do a lot of things. That is our start, and we've been working on that. That is a set of things that are frankly urgent and overdue. When we talk about rights restoration, we talk about automatic voter registration, those are not new ideas to this Capitol. And so those are things we need to get done. There's a lot of ideas, and I think you'll see a lot of members working on things that will expand and strengthen. So that is the floor, not the ceiling.
How fast do you expect this legislation to move? Do you have hearing dates yet? Any idea how many committee steps it's going to require?
I don't want to step on my chairs, so maybe I'll bring them up here.
Thank you. For those I don't know, I haven't introduced myself. I'm Mike Freiberg. I'm chairing the Elections Committee. We just noticed a couple pieces of House File 3. We're intending to hear them next week, pending receiving fiscal notes and so forth. But next week we'll be hearing the Restore the Vote portion of the bill, which I think is extremely important. My hope is we can hear House File 3 the following week. Oh, yeah.
Thank you, Mr. Freiberg. My name is Jim Carlson. I'm the state senator from Burnsville and Egan and Mendota Heights, and that's Senate District 52. And I'm, fortunately for me, the chair of the Elections Committee, so that we can get something done this year. We have not put together our total schedule yet. What we're doing, what you'll see next week, and by the way, we had to give up our hearing rooms to the Youth in Government group. So right now in my...
For democracy.
Yeah. More democracy, yes. And in fact, there's some of the Youth in Government people who are penning bills themselves. But so we'll be starting out next Tuesday, and we're going to have some agency coverage. And the Secretary of State is going to come to our committee on Thursday and give both a coverage of his job and what it entails, and then go into what has happened with elections in the most recent election. So we want to get our groundwork done first, so that people know what has happened and what maybe we'd like to happen, and maybe even some improvements. And then we'll schedule the meetings. We have several bills to schedule. Some of them maybe overlap the Senate File 3, but we may run some separately as well as Senate File 3. So there's a lot of things that still have to be determined.
I don't want to speak for the Senate Majority Leader. She's here. She can speak for herself. But from my perspective, we want to get as many bills on the governor's desk as soon as possible. So the components of House File 3 that have been introduced as separate independent bills, we will get to the governor's desk as quickly as they can get there. We'll continue to move the whole package. So we're looking to expedite action. Typically in the first 3 weeks of the legislature, you see a lot of overview hearings and a lot of conversation. Our objective in the House is to really, and I'm seeing in the Senate, the great work they already have the UI bill scheduled, is to hear bills and move bills, rather than spend a lot of time hearing agency overviews.
We have a lot of new people in the Senate, so we will be hearing the agency overviews, but I just left a meeting with the speaker, and we agree on a variety of these bills that have been around for a while, and we will be moving bills quickly. As I said earlier, we are excited to be here. We are ready to lead. We're getting to work, and so that's what we're doing.
Are there examples from other states that have successfully closed some of the dark money loopholes? Do we have a model to go by to how to do that?
So just this last year, Arizona passed a ballot initiative called, I believe it's called the Arizona Voters' Right to Know Initiative, which requires that if you're going to spend a large amount of money in an election on an independent side, which is really where we're seeing that dark money, nonprofits who are not disclosing at all, or who are disclosing, it's the Russian nesting dolls of Minnesotans for hot dish giving to Minnesotans for loons, where you don't really know, voters don't really know. Arizona is, there's a few other states that are, and I can get that to you, and my co-author, Senator Port, has been digging in.
Yeah, I'll just add to that while Senate File 3 is a floor, an important floor, we're not done with the work there, and we are looking at the legislation that passed in Arizona, New Jersey, New York, have various different aspects of closing the dark money loopholes. We're really focused on looking at the ways that we can center back into our elections and our politics around that, the voices of candidates, so that voters are hearing directly from candidates, how we can strengthen that piece of it, rather than having dark money corporations, large IE expenditures being the ones drowning out candidate voices. So we think the conversation between candidates and voters is critical and should be centered in this conversation. So while we do have provisions in Senate File 3, we are continuing the work on that. And there isn't a lot that's been done on this. It's been pretty effectively beat back in a lot of states. But Minnesotans told us they actually don't like that here. They want to make sure that they are able to hear from candidates and that corporations and really large donors don't have all the power. So we are looking outside of the box too and figuring out new ways to center that conversation.
Does this also address what many would consider a lack of campaign finance reporting deadlines, including the fact that groups don't have to report in odd years, for example?
So I think what you see in our campaign finance law, and we heard a little bit about this actually in committee, is that we really haven't updated it since, I'd say before Citizens United, and maybe if you look 10 years back before that. And so the issues you're raising, I think a lot of the issues are a campaign finance system that started with some leaders, Senator Marty and others really pioneered the way, but that was 3 or 4 decades ago. And so we really need a campaign finance system, a disclosure system, a public financing system that actually reflects the way that voters, that candidates are running elections, that voters participate, and that, as you say, that folks are spending money, so that voters, at the end of the day, are the ones who have the information they need to elect the candidates and hold them accountable, and that we, as elected officials, as leaders, are really in relationship with and responsive to the needs of our communities.
Unwritten rule around here that there has to be some bipartisan buy-in with elections bills. I mean, what has changed? I'm just curious what has changed. No, but I mean, is that a goal? Is that a hope? I mean, and also what has changed since January 6th? Has the urgency shifted a little bit?
So I think where we start is it's not about us. Right, it's about Minnesota voters. And so the question for policy should always be, is this good for Minnesota voters? Is it good for Democratic voters, Republican voters, voters with no party at all? Is it gonna get us closer to full participation? Is it gonna ensure that every voter, every community, every person in the state has a voice? And so when we have all of the policies in that bill have been passed in red states and blue states. But that should not be our litmus test. Our litmus test should be how it impacts, like every other policy we pass. And so when I think about the question, I would love to and have been engaging on this bill and a lot of bills, our folks across the aisle. I think that that's what's best for democracy. It's what's best for all of our voters. But that's certainly not going to be our litmus test is what we want. It's going to be what Minnesota voters want and need.
Yeah, just to add to that too. So I certainly have a good relationship with many colleagues across the aisle. I had, once the Representative Torkelson was named the lead of the Elections Committee, I had a good meeting with him. But in terms of having like a bright line rule, as Representative Greenman said, yeah, we need to do what's best for Minnesotans. We'll certainly make every effort we can to reach out to our colleagues across the aisle. I know, there have been a couple governors that have had this policy in place that they'd only sign a law if it has bipartisan support. I'm not aware that Governor Walz has made that sort of statement. And certainly within the legislature, the history kind of belies that. I know and I could provide you with a list. I was interested in this topic, so I just was curious how many bills, election-related bills, have been passed through the two legislative chambers. And there, when the Republicans controlled the state Senate, there were election bills that passed with one-party support, and that happened in the House when Leader Dowd was the speaker. So, we'll do what's best for Minnesotans, but I don't think we need to have any bright line rules.
Chair Carlson has talked about wanting to prioritize bills that have bipartisan support, at least early in the legislative session. Is that going to stick around, that policy, or do these proposals have Republican backing at this point?
Thank you for the question. That's what I want to try to do. Republicans have good ideas, so let's hear them. And you go back to the last two-year session, we had 104 bills that were referred to, election bills that were referred to the committee. And of those, 56 of them were democratically sponsored. Not one of the 56 were heard. So I want to be kinder than that. So what I'm saying is that to our members and to the Republican members, if you bring a bill, please don't have just 5 of your own party on it. Have somebody from the other party, because that gets rid of the first argument. When you come to the committee, you've already had your, maybe improved it with someone else's ideas. And if you can't get that done, then have a blank on it so that when we bring it to the committee, we can still talk about getting minority support on it. Now, that won't mean that we won't consider those that are strictly one party, but it at least gets the encouragement to reach out to your other members, to the members on the other side, and try to find some common ground. So yes, I think that that's the goal. That may not be the result. We have a governor who has already given us some very clear instructions on what he wants to get done. And so those are the things that we're going to really, we're going to push on very hard. So again, as much as we can have bipartisanship, that's fine, but we're not going to have that as a strict line.
And can I just mention something that I think hasn't been said, but that Senator Carlson said, which is if you listen to the inaugurals, you listen to our Secretary of State Steve Simon, you listen to Governor Walz, you listen to Lieutenant Governor Flanagan, and if you listen to Attorney General Ellison, there is unified agreement on these policies and on this approach. And so it's the legislature, but we also are really coming in. We elected a pro-democracy majority. We're elected a pro-democracy state leaders. And so I think you'll see that unified support because that's what, as Majority Leader Dietzig said, that's what voters told us, that's what we ran on, and that's what we're here to do.
Did you guys make any progress on doxing last year? Because I remember Judge Gruing was called out and doxed and others during the kind of the Storm the Capitol events here at the state capitol. Is there any movement on that?
I'm going to look to my colleagues. I know we did pass a doxing bill that specifically had to do with police officers. Look, that was it, yours, Representative Wilmot. And in our election worker protection bill and in some of our other bills, we had anti-doxing legislation. I will say about that, since we are talking about a bipartisanship, I'm really hoping that we can pass a strong election worker protection bill. This is just about protecting our 30,000 election workers, our election administrators who have really seen these rising threats from doxing, from intimidation and harassment. We have not passed that yet.
He said one more, so I was thinking lunch now.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Sorry,